Today, I wanted to focus on specifically the strategic planning process. I looked at all of your registration. Some of you are consultants learning on how to do the process. Some of you are just trying to learn more about strategic planning. Some of you are actively in the process. And so I thought I would just share, our process so that you can use it. If you are an internal person or a consultant and you want to learn how to do the process yourself, we have a course on that. If you go to courses.smestrategy.net, you can view our How to Facilitate a Strategic Planning Session course. And I designed that so that you would be able to have confidence in when doing it. So you know the questions to ask, the steps to go through, and really each of the phases. So that's available fully and completely now live. I'm in the process of recording, as I have been for a while, so I apologize. On implementation, because we've been building our implementation program, the modules and all of those things. We've got 22 modules internally, but that's not going to be fully available for the course. Really just try to stick it to the basics. But today I want to focus more on the process component of it. I will touch a little bit on the implementation side of it, just kind of the high level pieces. But again, if you want to stick around, you want to ask some questions, maybe I'll stop recording, I'll turn people's videos on and we can have a dialogue together. Hopefully that works, that link, Amelia. But it's so cool to see, there's folks from all over the US, all over Canada, India, thank you, that talk about strategic planning and that work on strategic planning because all organizations need it. So just wanted to be of value to, share the process. So a couple of things I wanted to cover today. I wanted for you to look at your strategic planning holistically. So to start thinking about the processes that you're going to, or the participants you're going to engage with, a couple different options on how to do that, what I would do if I was you. For you to consider timeline. The easiest way to think about that is either when do you want to start or when do you want it to end? To talk about how deeply, fully, and completely you want to engage people. So you could have a very small and relatively simple plan, or it could be very, very complex and thorough. To talk about the agenda, which we cover a lot of, but I want to walk through each of the sections, and then to talk about implementation. So those are all of the kind of components I wanted to discuss today. Again, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And as you know, we're always available. So, I guess the participants. So how do you structure the participants that go through your strategic planning process? So and then actually I'll just state with all views of this are SME strategies. I'm sure there's different ways to do it. It's just the way that we've been doing it I've been leading strategic planning sessions for 13 years now. So it's just the way we do it. I'm sure there's a different way. I don't know if there's a better way. So our guiding principles for strategic planning is have the people that are leading the organization be part of the strategic planning process. So most of the time, that is either a board of directors or the senior leadership team. And so I'll talk about for-profit institutions and not-for-profit organizations and look at those differently. So let's say you're a for-profit business. Your for-profit business is typically your senior leaders. They're the ones guiding the organization. They're also the ones doing the majority of the work. So if you're a for-profit organization, I consider bringing your senior leaders, that's your C-suite, your most senior managers first and foremost. If you want to include a second layer of management, it's a good idea. I wouldn't necessarily put them in the strategic planning process early because their understanding, consideration of different decisions, how decisions gets made are different than your most senior leaders. Yes, I think it's important to include them in the strategic planning process, but we've had challenges when you're trying to align fundamentally two different levels of manager. So we generally say at the highest level first, If you certainly want to include that next level of managers right away, early on, just allow more time. Just you have different people thinking with different lenses. It makes it challenging. So for-profit business, most senior leaders first. There's typically 10 or 15 people that occupy the most senior leadership, and get them to do that. If you're a nonprofit organization, or if you have a board, so if you have a board and it's a working board, then typically it's the working board that will do the strategic plan work and include the CEO or executive director. If you have a working board, an executive director, and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 key staff, including them all into the process is fine. As in, we haven't seen it create too many challenges in terms of alignment. So for us, everything is about getting alignment. And so if you're a nonprofit organization, get your board. If it's a working board, have the working board do the strategy, include your executive director and potentially a couple senior leaders. If it's a governance board, then I recommend having a stakeholder engagement for the governance board. We do stakeholder engagement through surveys and interviews. And we also have a smaller stakeholder engagement session, which is typically 2 or 3 hours long, to ask them their perspective on the organization, but we leave the heavy strategy work in the hands of the executive team. So it's important to engage those key stakeholders. In the case of a working board, or in the case of a governance board, their job is to govern and oversee. And so what we typically do is we'll have the leadership team create the strategic plan with the engagement from that governance board, so that there's alignment, and then they'll present it back up after. Just because typically in governance boards, they aren't engaged enough. They don't understand as much of the connection between what needs to be done from an operational perspective, to the degree that is needed to create a successful strategic plan. That's kind of how I'll say it. So it's possible that they know everything, the ins and outs of the organization, but if they're governance, their job is to basically approve the plan and understand it. So board of directors, governance, senior leaders creating the plan, roll it back up. If it is a board of directors that's working, start it up here and then work it down. If you are a for-profit organization and your executive team should be creating the strategic plan, if you happen to have a board, then you're still going to roll it up to them for them to share or for them to understand, and then you cascade it back down. So that's a key part on participants. I can touch on, if you have any questions, drop it in the chat. I'm happy to kind of take a step back and answer those for you. Let's talk about engagement. Who do you want to engage? So we've already discussed engaging your board of directors into the strategic planning process through an engagement session or through a survey. The benefit of doing a survey as part of the engagement is that it's asynchronous. And then some people like more time and space to think of their responses. They don't like kind of thinking on the spot. It also allows them to answer more thoroughly. They have more time to do it. It's overall like better for them. But we also complement that with live synchronous conversation amongst the board or the group, so that everybody can hear from each other and then use that as an opportunity for alignment. There's also the opportunity to do one-on-one stakeholder interviews in the case of meeting with the board, so that you understand those like core issues. So you're going to get more depth in one-on-one. You're going to get more engagement from everybody with a survey, but you're going to get more alignment in a group session. So the ideal for us is you put all 3 of those together. You get depth, breadth, you get contribution, especially if someone is busy or they aren't able to make it to that session. You don't want them to miss out on the opportunity to contribute. And then if you look broadly, depending on how thoroughly you want to engage your people. So you may be a public institution that has a lot of stakeholders and stakeholder groups. So you might say, before we do our strategic plan, we need to talk to everybody in our ecosystem so that they can contribute their perspectives to our plan. If you're a nonprofit organization, you might have funders, you might have partners, you might have other, organizations that contribute to your success, and you might have the community. Those are all people that you can engage. The consideration is, do you want those people thinking that they have a hand in guiding your organization? So I guess my advice to you is expectation management. You want to hear from them. You want to know what's important. You likely want to know what their vision is. But be careful about opening the door around them commenting on your organization or recommending things for your organization, because they probably don't have all of the context too. So getting their feedback can be valuable. It can also be challenging. So I'll just say expectation management. But for certain organizations that have wide-reaching plans and systems, that making sure that everybody is kind of on the same page will be critical. In the for-profit context, you can look at engagement with stakeholders, kind of pre-planning, post-planning, and we recommend both. So you may want to engage with different employee groups, different levels of management, as part of the strategic planning process. So see what those individual groups are thinking, use that as an input to your strategic plan to guide the decisions that you're going to make as an executive team, and then ultimately roll that back down. Some organizations want to engage with each individual team because they really want to make sure that it is all the perspectives are heard going into it, so they can make the best recommendations possible. Alternatively, the executive team and their managers already have a good pulse on what's going on. And then when they do the strategic planning session, they bring those perspectives into the conversation. Once they do the strategic planning, then they roll it back down. So nonprofit, typically, you want to engage your stakeholders earlier in some engagement. You want to look at opportunities for alignment to get their perspective, see what they say, what they want, and then potentially comment on where they want to see your organization. I mentioned expectation management. The difference is, if they're going to comment, or anybody commenting, you don't want them to think that they are recommendations that will be implemented. It's, hey, we want to get your perspective on what we're doing well, where we can improve, what does success look like for our organizations combined or our groups combined, and then what do we need to do to move forward with that. As it relates to for-profit organizations, engaging different staff groups, different management groups, getting their perspectives on how the organization is going, such that it informs the strategic plan and strategic direction, and that you create a system to close the loop on the communication to say, hey, we heard what you said, we got your feedback, we got your perspectives, we're going to incorporate it into our strategic planning process and somehow, some way address it down the line. Either, hey, we heard what you said, this is what we heard, or we heard what you said, this is our plan. You should see alignment between your perspectives and where our perspectives are, so that we can move that forward. And just because you said that you thought something should be improved doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it, because we can't do everything. And so getting into that piece around prioritization. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll just take a quick pause here for you to consider, like, the two things that I've discussed, participants and engagement, all go into building the structure of how you want to build your plan. And so time is obviously a consideration. Cost is obviously consideration for yours. So as you think of, hey, how do we want to design our strategic planning process? We could have it be very, very comprehensive, or relatively streamlined. The fewer people that you engage, the faster it's going to go. The more people that you engage, the more buy-in you could get. And some of it might be necessary. I've seen plans kind of derail based on if you didn't engage with a stakeholder. So I'll bring that into kind of timeline for us as we do strategic plans. If you're doing a relatively simple strategic plan for a for-profit or nonprofit organization with little stakeholder engagement, you can kind of think, 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. Okay, so think of that kind of 8-week, 90-day timeline, just to do the pre-work, the strategic planning process, the documentation, and then recap with your team. If you are wanting to engage stakeholders, there's the work of planning those meetings, organizing those meetings, scheduling those meetings so that everybody can show up, having those conversations. For large organizations, call it a university, a large nonprofit, that could take several months. That could take, 9 to 12 months, depending on how comprehensive you want it to be. It could also take, an extra month or two, depending on how organized you are. But often the more impact you have, the more people you need to engage. With a for-profit organization, I'll say, kind of generally speaking, there's less engagement done on the front end and more engagement done on the back end. So it's less on the planning phase and more on the implementation phase. So just consider all of that as you're like building your timelines, building your budget, not just finance budget, but time budget, to make sure everybody is moving forward. Okay, I got a question from Liliana. How should the structure of those conversations to align priorities so we can end the conversation with main points to attack? It's a great question. I might just change how you're thinking about it. Most folks think about what they're going to do versus where they're going to go. And we recommend helping teams focus on where they want to go, because if you know where you're going, what you need to do is obvious. So I'll share my screen with you here. So this talks about the number one thing that we focus on as an organization is help teams escape what we call the multiple destination trap. Teams get so focused on the tasks, they forget about the why. And so what we aim to do as part of our strategic planning process is not just figure out what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, but where are we trying to go first, and then use that as a filter to make decisions on where we want to go. So I'll get into the agenda now. Actually, it's probably a good time. So when we look at our one destination model, so we call this aligning your team to one destination. That means everybody's clear on where the vision is. What does success look like at a fixed point in time? We look at 3-year visions now because the speed of change is so quick. Also because most people can't think strategically, like really long term, save the CEO or certain board members. And so a 3-year vision is far enough that it's strategic, but close enough that you can tie the operational decisions that you're trying to make to them. So what does success look like in 2026, 2027, so on? What is our mission? Why do we exist? Sorry, my camera just turns off every half hour. Why do we exist? What do we exist to do, and for whom? If you are a mission-based organization, you may find that flipping the mission and vision is more appropriate, as in the organization is always focused on this mission. And if we do that mission successfully, this is what we will look like at that one destination time frame. So I wouldn't get stuck on that, but vision, mission. But for 90% of the organizations, even vision works at top, and mission is a function of us to get there. Values, what are the behaviors that we want to drive to help us get to where we want to go? Cascade that into priorities, so you can see that there's an incremental stage, and as we get into the agenda, it's even further down the line. But cascade the priorities. What are those high-level things that everybody needs to work on to get us to where we want to go? And then cascade that into goals and actions. I'm going to touch about cascading. So I alluded to, in a for-profit organization, you want your senior leaders, executive team to get clear on where you want to go, and then cascading that down to the sub teams, and then, further and further down the organization. So that can take a year or 2 years to really get everybody on the same page, but the benefit of being aligned is critical. Perfect. That's that. So this is my friend Micah, who's also a partner of ours. One of the things that we see with leadership teams is that the CEO or the executive director, whose job it is to be a couple steps ahead of the team strategically thinking. Sometimes they move too fast and they don't take the team with them. And it happens with many leaders, not their own fault, but if you've experienced this with some people, that they've already had those conversations in their head and they forget to tell everybody else. So what we focus on, and I'll touch on this a little bit in the implementation piece, is building your team's capacity or ability to implement strategy. So we're more concerned about building the skill of strategy implementation than doing a bunch of tasks within the strategic plan, because we see organizations that are performing, but they're not meeting their numbers because the culture is bad, because they're not communicating, because they're just not moving change along. In fact, I would argue that a strategic plan itself, ability for a team to function highly, is really why you have a strategic plan anyway. So we focus on alignment, responsibilities, and accountabilities, communication, monitoring, tracking, and reporting, values, behavior, and culture, and leadership and change management. And we continue that cycle ongoingly. So happy to talk more about that, but that's for a different webinar. But if you work on these things and if you get them to where you want to go, you will be more successful. So the goal of the implementation piece is, once you have the plan, and you have to keep bringing your team along to be able to move forward, grow together, help evolve the organization. So it's not just the planning piece, it's really the implementation and getting everybody along the journey. Some people are not going to want to continue on that journey, but many will want to continue. So, and then you'll eventually get to where you want to go. Yay! All right. So I'm going to talk about the agenda. So this is the agenda that we've developed over, a decade plus of strategic planning. It is designed to be done over 2 or 3 days. So I know a lot of organizations are saying, hey, we have 1 day to do strategic planning. And my kind of natural response is, you're leaving 1 day of planning for 1,100 days of implementation. It's just not sufficient to have the conversations that you need to have. We used to offer 1-day facilitations. We never got the outcomes that we wanted. So we don't offer 1 day on its own anymore. We only offer 2 or 3 days, or 1 day plus the requisite conversations ahead of time, because you can't skip steps. It's just not going to help you get to where you want to go. So I'm going to focus on the black text first, just so you can have a really simple rubric for your strategic plan. Is where are we now? Where are we going? What is going to get in our way? What do we need to do to get us to where we want to go? And then how are we going to implement it? So when we do virtual sessions, it's 5 3-hour sessions. We go through all these conversations. When it's 2 or 3 days, we go through this process. We, on a third day, when we do strategic planning, we leave it for call it core conversations, either communication, change management, specific issues relating to whatever, acquisitions, integrations, just like the task stuff. But we always do it in the context of the strategic plan first. So if you Google sample 2-day agenda, I have the timings there as well, and that's free online. So where are we now? Celebrating. Why do we celebrate? The very first thing that we do, we actually go over ground rules is the very first thing we do. But celebrating is because most leaders, most organizations are so focused on what they need to do, what they're not doing, or what the problems are, that they forget that they actually accomplished quite a bit over the year, 2 years, 3 years previous. And so you want to start your strategic planning process from a foundation of success. It'll just set your team in a more mental, positive state. You'll realize, be like, whoa, all of the problems that we have are a function of all the growth that we did over the past couple of years. So celebrating is critical. I recommend it at the beginning of most strategy reviews, as well as your whole strategic planning process. SWOT scan. It's not a SWOT analysis, because some people think that you can do a SWOT, you can do it much bigger. For us, we're trying to get a good snapshot of our current state. What are our strengths? What are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? So really getting a good snapshot of where we're at, so that everybody sees the same thing to a degree. A pestle analysis, that's to look at where the world is going, to look at what trends are happening moving forward. What are some things we should be aware of? What are the external factors that might impact us? Many, I won't say most, organizations are so focused on within their 4 walls, they forget about technological trends, finance trends, people trends, social trends, legal trends, environmental trends that might impact their business. So it's about being proactive versus reactive to things that are happening in the future. Where are we going? So this is when, once you know where you're at, you know where you want to go. 3-year visioning exercise. So not a vision statement, but really what is our one destination? What does success look like for us? Today's date, 2026. 3-year mission. Who are we? What do we do? Who do we do it for as a function of getting to our vision? For mission-based organizations, but for all organizations, your reason for being will probably change over time. That's probably a fair statement. Is that because your customers are going to change, their needs are going to change, your abilities are going to change, your skills are going to change. If you served a market like this before, you might need to serve a market like this to do it really well. I find a lot of mission-based organizations, they try to serve everybody and they can't do it effectively resource-wise. So refocusing on who you're going to serve is critical, what your value proposition is, that kind of thing. So where are we going is critical, but again, only to get us to where we want to go. What's going to get in our way? So it's a risk-based prioritization. So values and behaviors, making sure you have the right culture and behaviors in your organization to get you to where you want to go. You might have a value statement or culture statement in your organization already. If it's not serving you to get to your vision, if people aren't acting the way that you want or expect them to, then it's probably time to review your values and behaviors to make sure that they're relevant for who you are now, not who you were 3, 4, 10 years ago. Risk analysis, identifying anything and everything that's going to get in the way. A lot of organizations focus on their wants, as in, we want to do this, we want to do this, we want to do this. But when we look at a risk analysis, then you look at the biggest challenges in front of you so that you prioritize those first, or you work on the high impact, high urgent versus the low impact, low urgent type activity. So risk analysis, we do to identify what's going to get in our way. And then we prioritize what we need to do, focusing on 3 strategic priorities, high level critical things. So 3 buckets of things. We recommend having a champion either at the priority level or at the goal level. So once you cascade those priorities into SMART goals, someone asked me recently, what is the difference between objectives and goals? So objectives are qualitative, increase our customer base, get better employee satisfaction, communicate more. So they have a quality to them, but they're vague. SMART goals as part of your strategic plan is so you actually have measures as part of the planning process. We want to increase revenue by $5 million. We want to engage with our employees monthly. We want our net promoter score to be over 8 by a certain date. And so when you have those targets, everybody understands the amount of work that needs to go into it, but also the amount of energy, resource that needs to go into it to make sure that you're funding it sufficiently. If you want to get your net promoter score from a 4 to a 5, it's going to take a way different amount of energy than from a 4 to a 9. And so when you have the right SMART goals, you can better do the planning to help you get to where you want to go. The other reason for this, why we do strategic priorities, is because you can't focus on everything. Often teams say there's 5 or 6 or 7 priorities that they need to work on, and we kind of boil it down to 3 that are distinct and clear so that everybody in the organization knows what they need to work on. Finally, how are we going to implement it? So as I mentioned, some people do 2-3 days of strategic planning and they forget about the 1,100 days of implementation. We offer implementation support to keep teams accountable and to support coaches or support the leaders through coaching in making sure that everybody's focused on the right things. But this is really getting into the action planning. What are the chunks of work that we need to prioritize right away to get done? What is the communication planning that we're going to do? So how are we going to stay on top of our plan as a team? How are we going to communicate internally to make sure it gets done? Who do we need to inform about this plan? And then, as I alluded to, those critical capacities, we discuss them to say, hey, do we have what we need to stay in alignment? Does everybody know what their roles and responsibilities are? And if we don't have our roles and responsibilities, what happens? Do we have enough communication to keep our plan going? I'm not saying meetings. I mean, is the flow of information working within our organization to get what we need? Harvard did a study, not a study, they interviewed 26,000 employees at, I think it was like 60 companies, let's say. And they looked at what are the number 1 factors that relate to strong strategy execution: decision rights, so roles and responsibilities, and information moving freely across boundaries, so communication. So that's why we incorporate it as part of our implementation, because that's what makes a difference. Tracking, monitoring, reporting, so making sure that you're looking at your scoreboard on a regular basis. Values, behavior. We're talking to an organization right now, and they have this old culture that is in the way of their new goals. So they have the new goals, but the only way that they can accomplish their new goals is to address the old culture. And so they are clashing right now. And so part of the work that's going to need to happen is this organization is going to need to focus on the culture change, not just putting more processes and systems and plans in place to be successful. And then leadership and change management. And that really is supporting your leadership team, making sure that they have what they need to accomplish the plan. Are you making those little changes ongoingly? Are you supporting the teams and the people in what they need to move forward? Great. So partners agenda and then implementation. So I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. I'm going to answer a question, and then I think we're probably almost done for today. Can you share the link on the times again? Yes, I can do that after. That's for the agenda. Just Google strategic planning agenda and will likely come up. Okay, so implementation. A high level, simple implementation is you have stuff that you want to do in your organization. You have the projects and the tasks. And so you need to first identify the high level stuff that you want to work on. And then you need to provide a system to stay on top of it. So what we recommend at a minimum is monthly calls to discuss your strategic plan. Somebody said effectively slow down. So yes, I will record it. I think that's what you asked. And sorry, I just talk fast. I love what I do. Monthly calls to discuss the performance of the tasks. Quarterly calls, meetings, strategy reviews, to review the performance on the outcomes. So measuring the goals. We also, as part of our implementation package, incorporate skill building. So we do workshops to add the capacity. I'm trying not to use jargon, but I'll try to say it simply. Everybody in your organization has a different way of doing strategy. They've either never learned it or they learned it from, a Fortune 50. And so if everybody has a different way to do it, when you meet to do the work, everybody's going to say their way is right. And so what we put in place is a workshop series to help teams get on the same page on what those fundamental skills are. What is goal setting? Why is it important? What is the communication we need? What are our roles and responsibilities? What is change management and how do we move it forward? Project management. How do we want to do project management? One of the super valuable workshops that we do is on a team charter, which is just how do we want to work together as a team? How do we increase the trust within our organization so that we can have conflict effectively? Those are all conversations that won't show up in your strategic plan document, but those are the things that make the biggest difference in a team's ability to implement. If your team organization is not capable about having difficult conversations easily, say that again, if your team or organization is not able to have difficult conversations easily, then the biggest challenges in your organization are going to persist. And unless you're focused on improving your team's trust and ability to challenge each other, you're not going to break through those biggest challenges that your company's facing, because they're hard, they're uncomfortable, and quite frankly, they suck to talk about because it's just emotionally heavy. And so one of the things that we do differently than other strategic planning facilitators organizations is we tackle the culture and the people side of strategy, because that's where the real breakthroughs happen. So fun stuff. So what did we talk about today? We talked about the participants that you want to engage with as part of your strategic planning process. Who do you want at the table, and whose voice do you want as part of the planning? We talked about engagement, how and why you want to engage broadly and how long it can take. We talked about timelines, how long or fast you want it to go. Strategic planning season is typically in the fall. We had a very busy summer, especially coming out of an uncertain first half of the year. We talked about the agenda. Again, mentioning the balance between one day, which if you only have one day in person, make sure you do some pre-work and post-work that's sufficient. 2 days, or 3 days. I think if an organization is anywhere over $50 million in revenue, you need 3 days. If you're over, $800 million in revenue, you probably need 4 days because there's just a lot of stuff to talk about. And then the implementation piece of it. How do you stay on top of it? How do you keep talking about the issues that need to be worked on? And how do you create space for everybody to stay on top of the plans that need to happen? And how do you continually build trust in your organization? I think that's everything for today. Talk about budget. For us to facilitate a 2-day offsite in Canada or US is $16,500. To do a 3-day is $21,500. Virtual session is $12,500. And as I mentioned earlier, our strategic planning course, if you want to do it yourself, is $500, $495. And then we offer a 10% discount for nonprofits if you're interested. So I'll open the floor up to questions. And if you've got anything, please do. Otherwise, that's really everything. I can pull up that link for the agenda, but if you just Google 2-day strategic planning agenda, you'll find that. I will send out a recording for today, so you have access to it. And I think just make sure that you give yourself enough time on the front end, on the back end, to move everything forward, and make sure you engage the right people. It's not about going fast. Is really just, keeping a good and consistent flow. A lot of people expect magic to happen in that first 3 months, and they get down on themselves when they didn't accomplish everything that they wanted to in the first 3-4 months. And then I remind them that it's a 3-year plan, not a 3-month plan. But I find that with consistent focus, you really start seeing some great benefits at 6, 9, and 12 months. And then, a year or two of consistent work, you'll really start seeing moving those high level measures. We were working with a team, and that even in the first 6 months of working with them, the big organization, they said, hey, we're working like a team like never before, because of the contextual shift of, hey, we can't just work as a bunch of small teams together. We need to be one team that has teams beneath us. All right, pull it up to the chat. Add last. Okay, I don't know what that is. Oh, that's someone's auto thing. Great. Okay, I'm going to stop recording. If you've got questions, please feel free. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if we haven't already. Anthony at smestrategy.net is my email. And I'll send a follow-up email to everybody that registered, so that you get access to the recording. I'll send a link to the community there. And I hope today was valuable. Love some feedback. Actually, in the true spirit of strategic planning, what was your number one takeaway from today's session? What was your number one takeaway? What did you learn? What was your aha from today? We do that at the end of every strategic planning session, so we might as well do it here. Excellent. So while you're doing that, someone asked, what do I ask in surveys? What do I ask in surveys? So we ask questions that inform the strategic plan. So without giving away the surveys, because that's part of what you get in the course, you get the course or the verbatim survey in the course. We ask, what are we doing? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats, effectively? What does success look like for us? What are our biggest challenges? And more. Okay, so that's my vague way of saying we ask the questions that inform the conversations that we're having in our strategic plan. You may want to ask other questions, but we find that you don't want to ask too many questions because you'll get survey fatigue. You also want to ask the questions the right way so you get the right answers. So great. And I think I already talked about that. Perfect, straightforward, and thank you. Perfect case study next time. Okay, I will try to do that. Time is needed, absolutely. You wouldn't bottle a whiskey for 3 weeks and pull it out and say, oh, this isn't ready. it takes 3 years. You can use wine or you can use whatever. If you make a good sauce, it needs to simmer. So make sure that your team has time to simmer to do it. Thank you, Daisy. That was appreciated. Thank you, Kathy. The people side. Oh, man, we are human beings, like it or not. And that's what comprises organization. And not walk too fast. Make sure the team stays with you. I love it. All right, everybody. I'm going to stick around. I got 10 minutes or so to have a conversation. So I'm going to just stop the recording. I appreciate you. Be sure to connect. Thanks for being here. And if you know somebody doing strategic planning, if it's not you, please consider working with us. We just love helping people. So, all right, everyone, have a great day. And I'll stick around if you've got any questions. Bye.